We're going to dedicate the first chapter of our basic strategy course to a concept called simplification, which is often overlooked, but it's critical to make good decisions, especially good practical decisions at beginner level. The reason it's so often overlooked is that when analyzing with an engine, since a computer is a very strong chess player, it doesn't really care if a position is simple or complex. It will just play the objectively best move. Similarly, since it's a pretty basic concept, if we go for strategy books, they will often take it for granted. So they're going to discuss more advanced concepts and there's going to be some simplifications done in the background, but the author won't often really go through the details and explain it with as much care as we're going to do now. So the idea of simplification is pretty simple. Here, if we listen to an engine, or well, if we try to make perfect play, we will play something like check with our queen and try to get some attack, some mating attack. Maybe the king comes here, try to guess what happens if black goes to the corner. How would we finish the game there? So here is the only move. And we will play something like this, and we will try to enter the 7th rank with our rook, and if black tries to kick us away, we just take all the pawns until they let us put our rook in the 7th rank. So this is perfect play, it's the fastest way to get a win, but it's not necessarily the simplest, because we are beginners, we make mistakes, and maybe at some point we get an oversight and we end up being checkmated in the back rank, right? With an eventual rook coming here or whatever, and if we're not careful, we could get in trouble. So how would you play the position from the beginning if we're playing a much stronger player than us, someone we really want to make sure to get the simplest way possible? So the move I would suggest to play is Queen e8 check. Of course, the only option is to take, and we take back, and black has to take back. If they move the king, we just win the rook in the corner, right? So they take, and we take. And you may think, but we've lost a queen and a rook for 2 rooks, right? If we go back here, we have an extra queen, now we only have an extra rook. This exchange wasn't good for us, right? Well, if we think of the pieces that left the board, then it was a bad trade. But if we think of what's left on the board, it's an excellent trade, because now we only have a rook and there's no other pieces. So our rook will just play unopposed. If they come here, we can attack a pawn, and eventually we're going to capture at least some of these pawns, maybe all of them, maybe 2 of them, and get a very easy win. This is a position we will never lose. Like, even if we're playing Magnus Carlsen, he won't beat us in this position. Well, maybe if we go back to the very beginning, maybe here we make a mistake and we end up creating complications for ourselves. So this is why it's a practical idea to, when we have a material advantage, trade pieces, getting into a simpler position where fewer things could go wrong. Even if it's not the objectively best play, even if it's not the fastest way to win, we just keep things simple and easy for ourselves. After that introductory example, where we saw a very easy position to understand this concept, let's see how it would play out in something that looks more like an actual game. So here you can see that white has built some attack against the enemy king. You can see this bishop cutting off these squares, and the queen is attacking over here. And it's white's turn, and what would you play? Is there a hanging piece? Can we exploit this situation? Okay, so we can indeed. We can take this bishop, either like this or like this. And if we pay attention to what we talked before, we shouldn't really be thinking in terms of what's the objectively best move, but rather what will make our life easier once we get ahead of material, once we get the extra bishop. So if we take with the queen, there's only one legal move for black, and that move is to block the check. offering a queen trade. And since we're discussing simplification, you already know that we should absolutely take this trade now that we are ahead in material. We want to get a simple engine, an easy position that we can win without giving any chances for counterplay for our opponent. Of course, taking with the pawn is a good move. There's nothing wrong about taking the bishop with the pawn. But here we keep the queens on the board and we are making our life harder because maybe we can make some mistake later. So we should try to aim for simplification of the position because we are humans and we should understand that we are not perfect. So we don't really want complications when we are ahead in material. We want simplification. So here we trade, of course. Now white makes a good move, which is bringing the knight here, attacking both pawns, so it's a double attack. Black should defend. The pawn on this pawn isn't really being attacked because it's also protected, but this one is a real threat. If white takes, it's a free pawn. And so black just protects it with the knight, of course, and white goes for another simplification, so take, then take, and after a recapture, they make an intermediate move. Of course, if you're thinking of trading bishop for knight, it's good too, but white did it on the next move, so it's great. Now white will activate the remaining pieces, so castling. Not really so much about king safety. We will explore king safety later. This is more about bringing the rook to play, so maybe offering an extra simplification with the rook on the back rank. But of course, it's also okay to just activate the pieces. Black brings the bishop into the game and also stopping the coming of the rook. White activates a piece and lets black take a pawn, but it's a dangerous pawn because, well, black takes, there's really not much to do, and white has now several options. They could come here and check and attack this weak pawn over here. That would be all right. But they go instead for offering another trade. Okay, since the pawn can't really be defended easily, let's offer the trade and then we will give that check and take the pawn if needed. If black defends, well, there are several options here. We could check, we could come with the bishop here and attack. White has a really dominant position because of the extra piece. But in the game, after black came here, white did the trade. Of course, we want to simplify, even though these two pawns could look dangerous. But white has another great move, which is knight g3. This attacks the bishop, offering yet another simplification. And if the bishop moves, then white would take the pawn. So no danger there. Black moves the king, trying to protect the pawn and also attack this bishop. But white doesn't really care. They just take and now protect the bishop. Okay, so this is really the ideal. White could, of course, also trade the rooks, and that would be impressive. But we are already in a quite simple position. And of course, this kind of blurs the line between this course and the basic endgame course, but we're going to see the continuation just to illustrate the point. Of course, if black does any other move, white will just trade the final rook. So black activates the rook and gets it away, but you can see that white just activates the king and the rook and they take everything because there's really no way to defend. I'm going quickly, but you can explore this position. You have the link to the Lich study in the description and explore it at your own pace if you want to see any alternatives or see other options. So after a few moves, we see that here black resigned because there's just no way to stop the promotion of the pawn. So white has basically already won the game. Of course, depends on the level of the player. Some positions will be resigned sooner or later, but I think you get the idea of how white simplified the original advantageous position into a totally won endgame. So let's see another example. Here, if you count the material, you see that it's equal. Both sides have a queen, two rooks, two bishops, a knight, and 7 pawns. So why are we picking this example? Because white is about to gain a material advantage. How would you play in this position as white? And think of it a bit as a bit of a tactics problem. Okay, this is a hard one, so pause the video and think for a bit if you need it. Let's see the solution. So there's this battery of queen and bishop attacking over this diagonal. That would be dangerous, but this knight is protecting. So the way to win here is to remove the knight with our bishop, and well, either black accepts playing a knight down and also struggling with white's attack that wouldn't finish here, or they can take back the bishop. If they take with the pawn, then it's mate in two. Can you see how? Of course, like this. They can also take with the queen, and here is where white wins an advantage. It's not checkmate, but white can trade a queen for a knight, or a knight for a queen, I should say. And here you see that white has a massive advantage. So both sides with 4 pieces and 7 pawns, but white has a queen and black has this dark squared bishop to compensate. So should we simplify when we have not more pieces but better pieces? And the answer is still yes. White should simplify and try to get into an endgame with its maybe queen against bishop that should be easy to win, of course keeping a few pawns on each side. So white opens up the position a bit because, well, the thing is if black takes and white takes, and black takes now with the bishop. Now here there's a tactic. If you've done the basic tactics course, this should be an easy one for you. If not, I'll just let you know that the move is to take with the rook, and this pawn cannot move because there's or other rook that would be pinning it to the king. So black doesn't take that pawn. They try to block the position. Now you see white will exploit another pin like this. So this pawn cannot move, and now both queen and bishop are attacking it, so black has to protect it. And now white makes a somewhat smart move, and they stop protecting this pawn by playing rook here and maybe trying to get something on this open file. But the thing is, why leave the pawn unprotected? What's the point of this? Why let black take the pawn? And this is indeed what happened in the game. Black took the pawn, but this allows for a simplification, which is to just bring the bishop here and forcing the trade, because this is important. It's not enough to just offer trades to the opponent. We have to offer trades in a way that refusing it would leave us with an advantage. So here, if black doesn't trade, if they move the bishop away, they would lose the rook. So this is the kind of trade we want to offer. Trades that the opponent shouldn't refuse, so that we are not just spamming trade offers, we are actually obtaining an advantage, either through simplification as a practical advantage, or another sort of material or positional advantage if they refuse. Of course, black had the option to play rook here, which is a fine move, and white, of course, just moving the queen away would be fine, but I think the best possibility for black would be to just take here, and after black takes the queen, take the bishop. And you see that we have now an extra rook, and we've removed the pieces of the board. So we haven't really exceeded ourselves with the trades. We've done reasonable trades. We still have a great position, and we've simplified it. So in case black wants to start an attack, now there are few pieces on the board, so there's less danger. In the game though, black just took the bishop, say okay, let's accept the trade since there's no other good option. And you will see that now white did another simplification later on, which I get it. Maybe you wouldn't do it in a game, and it's okay. Different players have different levels and will see different things. The point is here, white saw an option to trade both rooks for this rook, this bishop, and this pawn. So, of course, try to figure it out if you can see how it happened. But I get it that you gotta be precise, and of course, this isn't mandatory. So there are plenty of good moves they could have played instead. So the move is just we take here, and now we give a check. And after the king moves, only option is forwards towards c6, because if they go to the back rank, white just takes the rook for free, right? Of course, there's also not the option of blocking, because, well, there are two attackers and only the king is protected. So this would in fact be checkmate, right? Can you see that? Anyway, this is the move they play, and now we take with check, and we win the pawn. Of course, this is a pretty complex combination, but you still get the idea, even if the details can sometimes be confusing or complicated. Okay, so black plays this move. Why this move? Well, the intent of this move is, of course, to create some harm here. So if we are careless, we play something like this, or let's say even worse, we take the pawn, then this would be checkmate, right? If we play the pawn move, then here we could still block the check, but we've lost our advantage. So instead, white just opens up a space for the king to run, and unless there's a back rank mate, black won't really be able to checkmate us with just a rook, so this is a good enough move. We will see in future chapters about king safety that we don't really want to move our pawns like this really often, but in this simpler position with just a rook, it's a perfectly fine way to play, so no problems here. And now black just, well, defends the last pawn they had on the queen side, but after this check, now black has to choose, so either let white take here or let white take there. Think about it for a second if you don't realize, but the thing is, if black blocks, then white takes. If black moves the king while still protecting the rook, then white takes here, and they will probably take here later or there in a few moves. So black decided to block the check. They were here and they blocked, and now white takes. Black brings the rook, annoying a bit the queen, and here white played a move that I wouldn't really suggest you to simplify like this until you are comfortable with endgames. So if you know for sure that the pawn endgame is a win, go for it, because it's more scientific, it will be exact, precise. If you're not really sure, then of course we can maybe check here and come here to attack some pawns, so we can do other stuff. But in this game, white went for the simplification again, because they know, it's important detail, that they already know for a fact that this will be a win, so why not? And once again, this is entering endgame curse territory, so I'm just gonna play the moves and let you realize why this is winning. The idea is that the queenside pawns, so these two pawns over here, are invulnerable to attack. Why? Because if black takes the pawn on the back, then the forward pawn will just run away. So the only thing black can do is just stay passively here while white takes basically all the pawns. So if black takes here, as we discussed, white will just run away with the pawn and there's no stopping it. Okay, so we saw in this example several trades, and depending on your level, you will want to do some of them and not others, or maybe you think all of them are fine. It's a bit subjective sometimes, but I want you to get the general idea of simplification. We don't want complicated positions when we're ahead. We want just to trade the pieces and get into a comfortable endgame. Of course, if you are not in the advantage, if you are the side who is down, you want the exact opposite to happen. You want complications. You want to keep pieces on the board and create an attack. Because if you checkmate your opponent, it doesn't really matter how many pieces down you are, right? So that's what you should be aiming for. I will add that there is an exception to the just trade everything rule. And it's that when we discuss pieces in the context of chess strategy, we generally don't mean pawns. We mean like knights and bishops, especially minor pieces, or rooks and queens, major pieces. Pawns work a bit differently because you can deliver a checkmate if you have a lonely queen or a lonely rook, but not with a bishop or a knight. So if you have a bishop or a knight on the board, you want to keep some pawn alive. At least one, the more the better. So we don't always want to be trading pawns when we're heading material. And here is an example where trading pawns helps the side who is down in material. You see black with a bishop and 3 pawns, and white with a knight and 2 pawns. So you would assume, given what we said, that white should do everything to keep the pieces on the board. And that's true for the knight. If the knight was traded for the bishop, white would just be losing. But it's not true for the pawns, and you will see how white here took the pawn, and it's offering a sacrifice of the knight, but if black takes the knight, then this gets messy. You see white takes the pawn, black comes back to defend because otherwise the pawn will promote, and now white can simply attack the enemy pawn and capture it. And this black will never win because even though they have an extra bishop, so an extra piece, with no pawns, this will never be converted into a checkmate. So instead of taking the knight, black took the pawn. And so one pawn from each side has been traded off. And now another will be because white takes, black comes here, and black takes the pawn. So now we only have bishop and pawn against knight. And this is very simple for white because what should they do? What do you think is the game plan to get a draw here as white? Well, white should take this knight and trade it for this pawn, because then the bishop alone won't be able to checkmate. So if there were more pawns, then this sacrifice wouldn't work. If we go back to the starting position and these pawns are alive, now trading this knight for this pawn would be losing. And we will study it in the endgame courses, but I think you can get the idea. And if you're not sure, we can play around with the position. So let's say if they take and come here, then this would be eventually losing for white. But let's go to the game and see that white's plan is actually quite simple. They just come here with the knight. It's check, so black king moves. White clears this square for the knight because that's where they decided they want to come to sacrifice here. There were other options, but this is quite simple. So black just moves away the bishop. The idea being to advance the pawn if possible. So with the bishop here, we cannot advance because we will lose basically the bishop and the pawn. So it's clearing the path a bit. And now white attacks the pawn, but also stops it from going forward. Black tries to bring the king into the game, and now white doesn't really care. They play a beautiful move, which is, well, of course, they could just block maybe or whatever, but they play knight over here with the idea of just going to this square where we already talked was the objective. And you will say, okay, but this is hanging the knight, right? Doesn't black just take it? And yes, that's an option, but then they will lose the pawn. And of course, if black plays any move, we come here and white just takes the pawn, and it's a draw. Still, I hope it's clear enough that pawns are usually an exception to the rule, but the law of simplification still applies. We want to trade our pieces when we are ahead in material, and we want to keep all the pieces on the board when we are down in material. There are other exceptions than just don't trade pawns, depending on the position, but I think this is the general game plan that we should follow. So to conclude this chapter on simplification, what would you play here if you had the white pieces? Think for a bit. Take as much time as you need to understand as many details as you can from the position. Okay, so I hope you saw some ideas. For instance, well, the most basic is black is threatening checkmate. So white has to do something about it right now, or else they will lose the game. White has a material advantage, so they have everything else is equal, but they have this knight for this pawn, so we could start to think about simplification. And with that in mind, I think it's enough to get to the right move. Because there are two ways to stop the checkmate. Well, two sensible ones. Of course, we can sacrifice the queen and delay it by one move, but the proper ways to stop the checkmate would be queen here, covering this square, and queen here, also covering the square. So which one is the better move? Which one is correct? Which should we play? Okay, so objectively both are great, but in practical terms, white should always go for this one. Why? Because we are offering a queen trade, and we are not just offering it, we are making it quite difficult for black to refuse, because this bishop is hanging, and there isn't really a way for black to stop those things. So either they allow the trade or they lose the bishop. So if they bring the queen back, they lose the bishop. If they move the bishop, protecting the queen, we can trade. So there's no escape. It's either one or the other. There's no way to get out of both. So this is why this move is what we should go for. The other move also stops checkmate, and it's not really bad because we could eventually come back here as well. But now we have to think about different possibilities for black. What happens if they activate the rook? What happens if they kick our queen away? So many complications that we don't really want to deal with. So for this reason, I think a practical player should always go for the alternative move, offer the queen trade, and play the new simplified position like this.